Welcome to this week's Pach-Attack. Happy to have you back. I'm dressed casually. I didn't shave. I did shower, I promise. I have a question from Twitter from @StoningGames. Mr. Pachter, why don't more companies port NES games to smartphones? Is Capcom profiting with Mega Man on iOS? I talked about this a few weeks ago on a Pach-Attack about what I would do differently if I were Nintendo. The best NES games were Nintendo games. And so, sure, I think NES, Super NES, Game Boy One, Game Boy Color games, all should be ported to smartphones. I think that would be, brand building. I doubt that Capcom is making very much money on Mega Man, but I'm certain that they're making money because the assets don't cost much to put onto a smartphone. And smartphone games generate pretty small revenues. If you look at the Angry Birds filing, they only did about 50 million bucks from game sales and virtual items in games. I mean, the rest of their revenue came from licensed products like plush toys and things. And so Angry Birds, which is arguably the most downloaded smartphone game ever, does 50 million bucks. I would imagine Mega Man did $1 million or less. Now, again, $1 million, not bad, but not really enough to move the needle even at Capcom. I think you're going to see more IP show up as tablets and smartphones get smarter and smarter. I actually think you'll probably see a lot of PS1 and PS2 games ending up on tablets. I think Sony does actually plan to do that. And Nintendo, no. So I think since Nintendo dominated NES and Super NES, you're not going to see a lot of content port over. But yes, the other Japanese developers that put stuff on NES will probably port over. Our next question comes from Brute Learn. Wow. Brute Learn. Hello, Mr. Pachter. What do you think is the reasoning behind Ubisoft delaying most of its PC launches? Last year, for almost all of its big games, the PC versions were delayed, a lot of times on the 11th hour. Wouldn't it be easier to announce a later release date for the PC for whatever reason, rather than announce a delay out of the blue? I think Ubisoft genuinely hates piracy. I think Ubisoft, probably more than most publishers, is impacted by piracy. They told me that from Assassin's Creed 1 to Assassin's Creed 2, their PC packaged goods sales declined 90%. So I don't really remember the PC unit number, but I think it was something like 1 million units of Assassin's Creed 1 and about 100,000 of Assassin's Creed 2, and I think those numbers are pretty close. They believe that demand was the same for both games. They believe that 900,000 copies are pirated or more, and it costs them a lot of money. I mean, certainly $30 or $40 million. So I think most of what Ubisoft does on the PC side is figure out ways to stop piracy. We've had episodes of Pach-Attack in the past when we talk about always on, streaming on the internet, so Ubisoft can validate that you bought a legitimate copy. Gamers seem to hate that because if the internet connection is disrupted, the gameplay experience is disrupted. But I think most of those delays are about digital rights management and keeping people from ripping them off. I don't think there's a solution. I mean, we can bash the pirates, but if people would stop stealing, I think that you get a lot more PC games. People aren't going to stop stealing because free is better for a lot of people than paying. So too bad. And for those of you who are legit PC gamers, I'm sorry that you have to wait because it's going to keep happening as long as there are other people screwing it up for you. From @/Len, when PS4 and 720 arrive, do you expect publishers to try to move the standard price of a game up from $60? Brilliant question. I don't, but I think that's a great question. I don't expect it, but they might try anyway. And I think you're getting a signal right now from the publishers on what they're going to try. I think the two signals we've gotten in this past year are Call of Duty Elite and Battlefield Premium. And I think what you're going to see is that the game will still be 60 bucks, but you might be required to pre-buy the downloads. So what you might see is the game will be 60, but they'll package it at 90 and it'll include 4 downloads, something like that. And they'll try to sell it to you as a bundle. I'm not sure that that'll happen at launch. I think that's where we're migrating though. There is nothing sacred about 60 bucks. I mean, I think that if next-gen games truly cost more to develop, then they will raise the price to 70. My understanding is, and I got this from Andrew Wilson at Electronic Arts, who runs EA Sports, they really don't think it's going to cost much more to make next-gen games. And the reason is that when we went from PS2 and Xbox to PS3 and Xbox 360, you went from a single core processor, just one CPU, to multiple threads. So, you know, the Xbox has 3 cores, the PS3 has 7. And it was very complicated to figure out how to parallel process and do all these multiple threads and, you know, parse up your graphics and figure out how to allocate memory, bring all the moving parts together. They figured that out. So the next generation consoles aren't going to be that much more complicated as far as the threads. What is going to be more complex is the display. You know, they're obviously going to get 240 frames a second maxed out as opposed to 60. And the processing power will allow you to do a lot more things at once, each of which the publishers have figured out how to do. So they really probably aren't going to spend that much more effort. Right now, to make an Xbox 360 game, you're seeing publishers have to make choices. You know, do we have higher graphic fidelity but then have only 30 frames a second? They won't have to make that choice with the next gen. They're not going to sacrifice, they're just going to put stuff in that they've already put in. They've already figured out how to use the art assets and how to make those things run a little faster. So I would say your cost of development, instead of going up by 4-fold, which is kind of what we saw from PS2 and Xbox to PS3 and Xbox 360, you're probably going to see cost of development go up by 10-15%. And I don't think that's enough to cause them to raise the price of a game 10 bucks. So my guess is games stay at 60. More interesting to me is going to be what the Wii U prices games at. Will Nintendo try to go to 60 or will they stay at 50? If they stay at 50, I actually think they're making a mistake, because I think that'll signal the public that this thing is of lower quality than the other consoles. So it will be really interesting to see. All right, fellow babies, thanks for joining us on this week's Pach-Attack. If you have a question, please submit them to the link below. And if you have a question for me on Twitter, I'm at Michael Pachter. You have to follow me on Twitter so I can reply. If you want a question answered on the show, please make sure you copy at Rohan Likes Pants, because Rohan picks all the questions.